name is Justin. I am the owner, one of the designers, and will be driver of the s2kwabbit time attack and hill climb car. Welcome to the YouTube channel. This is going to be here to kind of follow the car's progress from here on out. Now, if you haven't been following the Instagram, we're kind of at a point where the car is getting ready for tear down, powder coat, and then final assembly back together. And then we're also going to follow along with the car as we go to events. Obviously future hill climbs, time attack events with global time attack, potentially some grid life later on down the line, things on that end. But this is really just going to be here to kind of, again, follow everything along with the car as well as myself, the build process, some technical analysis, obviously some composite work, and just me kind of learning along the way, as a lot of this stuff is new to me. None of this is my actual profession, so just kind of go along through a DIY style to how I get the car to where it is, what I can do on that end. Obviously the partners that have helped me along the way, which has been quite a few, which we'll definitely go over on that end. But welcome to the YouTube channel. We'll go ahead and see what we can get into with this car. Alright, so I've been trying to think of a bunch of different ways to actually start this video, come up with this video. It's been a long time coming, obviously. You know, the car's made a lot of progress, and I've been trying to get one of these done for quite a long time. But I figured the best way to do this would just be to kind of give you an overview of the car, where things are at, kind of go over some of the partners and everything that have helped along the way, and just a little more background on myself, and then how this car came to be. So at its heart, on the shell side, it's a 82 Volkswagen. It's a Mark 1. It had the round headlight conversion done to it, so however that kind of pans things out, you know, for some of the Volkswagen people out there that maybe know a little bit more than I do. But at its heart, that was the basic shell. I've always been a fan of the boxier Volkswagen hatchback, so that's kind of what I wanted to go with. My very first race car that I had was actually a Mark II. Unfortunately, that had a little bit of a crash on track right when I was starting this project, so that's been set aside for a while and everything on that end. I'll try and cut to a photo of that so you can get an idea of what that vehicle looked like, but that's what really kind of helped me get the track bug. And then after that car got a little out of hand from being a daily driver to a full track car, I actually migrated to a Miata, which, again, I'm sure a lot of people have had a lot of fun in on that side. But this project, I kind of wanted to mix the best of both worlds on that end. Again, I really like the appearance of the Golf, the weight that came along with the Golf, the Rabbit actually being even lighter. And then I wanted to convert it to rear-wheel drive. I always wish these cars came rear-wheel drive, so the answer to everything is always Miata, so it just seemed like the right route to go on that end. So again, the shell is a Mark 1 Rabbit. The subframes front and rear are off of a 93 Mazda Miata, the NA version. The front subframe is actually the V8 Roadster's front subframe for their V8 swaps. They've been more than helpful along the way for the whole project on solving some of these issues that I was having, things on that end. Same thing with the rear. I'm using their Ford 8.8 conversion in there, so comes with axles, diff mount, everything on that. And so it really made getting a strong enough Miata for what we were looking for power-wise and everything to really kind of come to fruition, make stuff extremely simple on that side. That way I didn't really have to kind of over-engineer a lot of things on these end. For the motor, it is an AP1 motor from a 2003 Honda S2000. For the most part, internal-wise, it's pretty well stock. So these motors have a lot of forged internals basically straight from the factory, so they can hold a lot of power just as is. All we really did was I did a ARP studs, SuperTech valve train, and then basically a turbo. Plan on running E85. The motor should easily hold somewhere around 600, potentially 700 horsepower. People have pushed them a lot higher, but given where the car's at, the weight, all of the things on that end, it shouldn't be anything we need, above 5, maybe 600 on that side, but then we really start to run into traction issues. So that's going to be something that we'll really have to consider. But it seemed like a great, strong power plant, something that if I ever had any issues, I could just purchase another stock one, throw it in there, and then make things pretty simple. I didn't have to go through and do the valve train. I didn't have to go through, change head gaskets, everything on that end, but most of the easy stuff, in a pinch, I could just bolt another motor right up to it and just kind of go from there. So it seemed like a pretty good solution on that side to kind of give me the power, the high revving, the Honda reliability on that end, and everything else on that side. Now, as we move into kind of the chassis side of the car and the cage, Rocco at Level Motorsports was the one that went through, really designed the cage, obviously installed it, did all the work on that end. He has a long history of doing fantastic cages, a long history of doing hill climbs and time attack racing himself. So in a situation like this where, obviously your safety and in some cases your life are kind of, in the hands of the fabricator, I really felt something like this was left up to someone obviously with, more skilled hands, more skilled knowledge, everything on that side, just really to make sure that, everything was done according to the rules, obviously within the rules, within the gray area of the rules, which is, where a lot of these cars are kind of built at this point. But, he did fantastic work. Obviously, something like this is, really designed to make you feel safe and everything good to go on that end. So, again, it was Rocco at Level Motorsports. Did a fantastic job on the cage side. A lot of the help on the design work for, turning a front-wheel drive car into a rear-wheel drive car, which, despite, how easy it may sound, is definitely a lot more complicated than it seems. Probably the biggest hurdle that ran into with the entire build so far was going to revolve around the transmission. Maybe a little tough to see here, but the transmission itself is a 4-speed Jericho, similar to what they use in NASCAR. The big issue is with the S2000, as any turbo S2000 guys would know, is they're not exactly the strongest boxes out there. They tend to break, even as light as just a little bit over stock power. Now, with us planning to make obviously dramatically over stock power for what the S2000 box would handle, we really had to start looking for different solutions on this. Actually, another quite popular car, the S2 Million. Some of you may have seen it or been familiar with it. It was an older time attack car that was actually just recently resurrected by another GTA driver named Paul, who's actually got it out on track, driving it. Again, it's a fantastic machine, but the original builder of that car actually happened to be at Level Motorsports one day, mentioned to us that he had problems with the boxes, and again, this was new to me. The fact that with their car, they were breaking a transmission almost every event, but they were running quite significant horsepower. I think the car was originally built for, might have been like the Optima Battery Ultimate Car Challenge, where you did drag, autocross, and like a track day all in one. They're using a G-Force 4-speed transmission. He was actually kind enough to give us a plate that adapt the stock S2000 bell housing to this G-Force 4-speed transmission. The only thing that we kind of missed there in communication was that you had to get a custom input shaft made, so we ended up going with the Jericho, getting everything set up with that, and then finding out relatively quickly that the input shaft on the Jericho, which is kind of a standard Ford size one, is nowhere near long enough to go all the way through the S2000 gearbox bell housing, because it's probably about 18 inches long, and then I think the Jericho one is only maybe about 6 inches long. What I ended up doing, and this probably took about 5 months to work out, it's kind of tough that I found to actually get a custom bell housing made to something of this specification, considering something like this, outside of what the S2 Million had never really been done before in this type of aspect. I didn't really want to go the custom route of getting an input shaft, things on that end, because as much as it seems like it may have gone awry, a lot of the parts for this car are very off the shelf. The suspension, the BC suspension, which again has been a great partner through this whole thing, is off the shelf Miata suspension. All the control arms, off the shelf Miata stuff. The entire rear subframe itself has had really no modification done to it whatsoever, so you can just bolt up a standard Miata one on that. So a lot of the stuff that may be considered wear items, or you might run into like failures with, after a couple seasons, things on that, I did my best to try and keep as, off-the-shelf items. Again, there's a lot of it that you just could not avoid, so that made it very difficult on that end. But I tried to stick with the transmission, being that it's a high-dollar part, to be an off-the-shelf transmission. That way, if something ever happened, I could just purchase another Jericho transmission, throw it in there, and be good to go. So there's a company over in England. It's called Red. It's Race Engine Design. They deal a lot with S2000 parts. I think some old like Opel or Vauxhall stuff on that, and a lot of hill climb cars. They make an S2000 bell housing that goes to an old Ford Type 9 transmission, which, again, not the strongest transmission out there on that end, but the actual dimensions and everything for it were almost spot on to where I could bolt the adapter plate that I was given to by the previous owner of the S2 Million car to the back of that transmission because it was just a flat face transmission. Again, on the Instagram page, there's plenty of pictures of this and kind of the adaptation to make that work. You know, we communicated back and forth through emails, a lot of measurements. We actually ended up on a phone call a couple times, which with the time zones was a little tricky. But we ended up being able to slightly modify his bell housing a little bit. I got my plate modified here by a machine shop. So everything just kind of bolts right together. So in a situation like this, if there was ever a problem, I could just order another one of those bell housings. My adapter plate isn't something that's going to break. You know, it's 10 mil thick, solid 6061 with a couple holes in it. So, you know, that's probably not a fail item or anything on that, or even a wear item. So again, if the bell housing goes, that's a semi off-the-shelf part that I can get. You know, obviously have it shipped over here, but if I wanted another one made, it's a phone call and email away. So very simple on that end. Clutch Masters, during this whole process, kind of came on board to help out with the clutch. Again, going with the measurements and everything, trying my best to keep everything as stock as possible. The entire inside dimensions for the bell housing are standard S2000. You could even run an S2000, you know, clutch, throwout bearing, all of that stuff if you really wanted to. We went with the Clutch Masters twin disc setup, obviously to accommodate the power, you know, the grip needed, you know, obviously a little bit better because it's a little bit smaller, so you've got a little bit tighter rotating mass in there. So that kind of helps things a little bit with throttle response. But Clutch Masters has been great to kind of help out on that side and went through some measurements for me. Made a couple alterations to it to accommodate the Ford pilot bearing or bushing. So that really helped things out on that end. So that was probably the toughest part of the entire build, was just really getting that figured out because it took quite a few months. But once that was there, Rockwell Lever Motorsports was able to mount the engine, you know, accommodate stuff for the external shifter. But once we got all in there, stuff actually was able to move along very quickly, get to the point where everything was mounted so we could get the vehicle itself back over to my shop here so I could actually go through and start doing a lot of the body work, which is custom wide body, custom carbon and fiberglass. But at this point, with everything mounted into the car, you know, we were able to fit the seat properly, figure out the steering, things on that. It's a very, very tight cockpit on that side. So myself, I'm 6'1" and some change, almost 6'2". So it is just enough room for myself. You know, we had to go with the forward-facing master cylinder pedal box from OBP just to accommodate that. The pedals are right up against the firewall. We had to do some modification to the actual throttle linkage on the ITBs, which a good friend of mine, a machinist Jordan, was actually able to complete for me relatively recently before we start this teardown process. I'm trying to cover a lot of information about the car in a relatively short amount of time. That way the video just doesn't kind of drag on for you. So I'm just going to really do a quick walkthrough. This is where the car actually is today as of February 15th, 2019. So this is completely caught up to date. Obviously going with a V-mount radiator and intercooler setup. I opted to put priority on the radiator in regards to airflow, everything on that end. A big thing with Pikes Peak, which is the main hill climb event that we're looking for with this car, is obviously cooling. So I wanted to optimize as much as I could. I'm using the S2000 radiator. It's an upgraded one, obviously, but you know, with as much room as we had in the engine bay, space really did start to deteriorate and kind of disappear really quickly. So as it sits right now, this is kind of the most optimized setup I could come up with. With anything like this, it's all development. So, you know, the car will obviously change. I did sacrifice a little bit of airflow to the intercooler on that being where it is, but I should be able to duct things properly to get some airflow down there. The car as it sits right now is on a set of 949 Racing 15x11 wheels, and I'm running a set of American Racer tires. They're a bias ply tire. It's kind of a Hoosier alternative for me right now. Obviously Hoosier tires are very expensive. These run about 120 bucks a pair, and people are able to get relatively similar times to them. With how short the suspension travel is and room that I have for things, I'm actually using the fact that the tire comes with a slightly higher sidewall as part of my suspension. So to give myself a little room, similar to maybe how Formula cars run, where they don't have a lot of suspension travel, but they do run quite tall sidewalls to actually get themselves a little bit of cushion there on everything on that side. Again, here is the pedal box that we went with on this end. I'm working on a set of kind of custom pedal pads on that end just to accommodate the space. Kick plate to cover the master cylinders. This is all stuff that was made by me. An OBP HTER seat. I'm a big fan of any of the Halo seats just for the extra protection on that side. With the fuel system, which is all housed here in the passenger seat. Again, this is a full aluminum box on that side. TIG welded basically all the way around. ATL was another partner that came on a little bit as of recent on this end after dealing with space restrictions for the fuel cell in here and realizing how small of a cell we actually needed. Got in touch with ATL and they were able to help me out with this. Running obviously dual pump setup here to feed into the surge tank. The idea is to keep everything kind of contained in here, as well as the ECU would be mounted up here in front, and this is going to be the exit for the wiring harness in there. The idea is to keep no wires, no lines, anything, going from under the car. That way there's no kind of worry about anything on that side. Obviously it's not a huge concern, but if I can keep everything contained within the car, inside boxes like this, it just makes things a lot stronger, a lot safer, and peace of mind goes a long way. We kind of work to the back. This you can kind of see some of the actual setup for getting the diff and everything mounted. Again, just basically a stock Miata rear end. I do have upgraded control arms and everything from V8 Roadster. They're full billet arms. Those have yet to be installed. Obviously going to do that after paint, but here is the wing. This is another part that was made by myself, kind of like one of my first fortes into carbon. Things on that side was obviously with this wing. It is 72 wide by 13. The wing profile is an Epler 664 extended. It's a standard wing profile, which really helps. You can go online to any database, kind of get a rough idea on like drag to lift numbers, and then basically flip them to give yourself the idea of downforce. There's a little bit more work that goes into that, but you can call a lot of places that can cut these out of foam for you, wrap them in carbon, a little bit of prep work, and then you end up with a great wing that you have some rough numbers on to kind of work across from there. The roof itself is a carbon Kevlar. This is the very first thing that I actually ever made. It's a little heavier than it needs to be, but again, first part that I ever made, might as well start with something big and just kind of go from there. Okay, so that is the, semi-brief, not so brief overview of the s2kwabbit. There is 1.5 million things else that I could cover on this, which I'll do my best to cover in another video, but I really wanted to get a video out there, kind of get an idea of where the progress is, where the car itself is as it sits today. Myself, I'm actually in the process of moving to California over the next couple weeks on that end from Arizona. So I've got a lot of work kind of going on that side, but the idea is where I'm moving I'm only a couple hours away from where my shop is currently. So I'll be able to go back and forth for a little bit until I get everything kind of situated and find shop space there. The idea is to not have the build slow down at all. Again, we're at the point where I plan on taking the car apart within the next couple of weeks, getting it off to powder coat. That'll take a week or so to get sorted out, and then once it's done, come back, put the car back together. At that point, it's a wiring harness away from being ready to start up. Brake lines away from being able to drive on that end, which we have everything ready to go. It's really just a matter of getting the car painted so we can kind of do all that stuff for the last time, work out a couple odds and ends, and then it's on to tuning, testing, things on that side. I'd be optimistic if I said that this was going to be ready for Road Atlanta in May, but that would be a great goal to kind of have on that end, but ideally I think it's going to be a little bit longer. Again, big thank you to Level Motorsports for really helping along with this project over the last couple of years. It was a kind of outlandish idea, and Rocco really went above and beyond to make sure that it happened. Again, huge thank you to V8 Roadsters, who really solved a lot of our problems before they were actual problems, especially with the conversion side of things, making sure we had strong enough rear end to take care of all this stuff. BC for always helping out with suspension stuff with this car, my previous car. They've been a great company to work with and just purchase parts from in general. And then their continued support throughout everything, to make sure that we're getting the right suspension, everything on that. There's a couple different things that we're doing along the way suspension-wise, so having their support and everything will obviously be pivotal, be key to make sure that we get the car to keep the wheels on the ground. With the weight that we're shooting for, the power levels it's going to be at, that's going to be a tough part just really to accommodate on that end. So between aero and suspension, really going to kind of need a lot of work on that and a lot of development, but that's part of the fun of the whole thing. Obviously Clutch Masters for helping out with the clutch solution on that end, making sure that all that kind of lines up and works and dealing with the measurements there, and then ATL for really coming through with the fuel cell, just to make sure we can get everything set up where we want, get the fuel cell positioned how I wanted and where I needed it to be on that end to help with driver balance. But there's a ton of other people that have helped along the way just to get things to this point. They definitely knew who they are, but feel free to like the page, subscribe to this channel, follow the Instagram. Again, the Facebook as well. That doesn't get updated as much, but that's more me being lazy. But there'll definitely be some more updates on this end, especially once the car gets back from paint or even tear down. I'm going to try and get another video out with just a little bit more information. If there's any questions, obviously ask on the Instagram or go ahead and comment here on the channel itself, and I'll do my best to get to those in the next video, which will probably be another informational video, maybe a little bit of DIY on how I handle some of the carbon stuff and things on that. The car, for the most part, is 90% carbon wide body on that end that was custom built by myself. So maybe we'll kind of go into a little bit of how I accommodated that. But until then, appreciate you guys' time, appreciate your support, and again, talk to you next time.